The word ugly hung in the frost-bitten air like a death sentence. Clara Hayes stood at the train station, her work-worn hands trembling not from cold, but from the devastating rejection in Thomas Mercer's eyes. The man who'd promised marriage through letters now looked at her like spoiled goods at market. "This is a mistake," he spat, turning his back on the woman who'd traveled 1,000 miles to be his bride. Welcome to my story, friends. Follow Clara's journey to the very end and comment your city below so I can see how far her tale has traveled. The December wind cut through Clara Hayes' threadbare coat like accusations, each gust seeming to whisper the same word Thomas Mercer hadn't quite said, but had painted across his face with perfect clarity. She stood on the platform of Cedar Ridge Station, watching his retreating figure disappear into a carriage that should have carried them both to their new life together. Instead, she remained alone with her single battered suitcase, the weight of it suddenly unbearable in her rough hands. "Move along, miss," the station master said, not unkindly, but with the practiced indifference of someone who'd seen too many stories end at this platform. "Station closes at sundown." Clara lifted her chin, a gesture she'd perfected over years of being looked down upon. "Could you direct me to the nearest boarding house?" The man's eyes traveled over her patched dress, the visible calluses on her hands where her gloves had worn through, the practical boots that spoke of labor rather than leisure. "Mrs. Whitmore's is 2 blocks east, though—" he hesitated. "She's particular about her clientele." The unspoken message was clear. Women like Clara, women whose hands knew work, whose backs knew burden, weren't the sort Mrs. Whitmore would welcome. But Clara had nowhere else to go. The walk to the boarding house felt like a parade of shame. Cedar Ridge was a prosperous cattle town, its main street lined with establishments that gleamed with fresh paint and pride. The mercantile's windows displayed goods she couldn't afford. The hotel's brass fixtures caught the dying light like golden promises she'd never touch. And everywhere, people stared. Word traveled fast in towns like this. By the time she reached Mrs. Whitmore's Victorian boarding house with its pristine white fence and judgmental windows, Clara knew her story had already been written in the minds of everyone watching. "I'm looking for a room," Clara announced when Mrs. Whitmore answered the door. The woman was everything Clara wasn't, soft where Clara was hardened, polished where Clara was worn, elevated where Clara had always been grounded. "I'm afraid we're fully booked," Mrs. Whitmore said, though Clara could see through the parlor window that the dining table was set for only 3. "I can pay," Clara said, reaching for the small purse that held her life savings. Mrs. Whitmore's laugh was like china breaking. "My dear girl, this isn't about money. This is about maintaining standards. I heard about you, the mail-order bride who showed up looking like she'd been working the fields. Mr. Mercer is a respected man in this town. If he sent you away, I'm certain he had his reasons." The door closed with a finality that echoed through Clara's bones. 3 more boarding houses, 3 more rejections, each one more humiliating than the last. By the time full darkness claimed the town, Clara found herself at the back door of Hollowell's bakery, where a hastily written sign advertised for help. Mr. Hollowell was a mountain of a man, flour dusted into every crease of his face like snow on a weathered cliff. He looked Clara over with the calculating eye of someone who measured value in sweat and endurance. "You that girl Mercer rejected?" Clara's jaw tightened. "I'm a woman looking for work." "Work," he laughed, but it wasn't cruel, just tired. "Can you lift 50-pound sacks? Can you scrub ovens at 3 in the morning? Can you handle burns without whimpering?" "I can do whatever needs doing." He studied her hands, nodding at what he saw there. "Job pays almost nothing. You'll sleep in the storeroom upstairs. It's not fit for much, roof leaks when it rains, cold as hell in winter, but it's a roof, and you'll eat what doesn't sell." "Still interested?" "Yes." "Start now. Morning shift begins at 3, but there's cleaning from today that needs doing." Clara set down her suitcase in the corner and rolled up her sleeves. The ovens were caked with years of burnt sugar and neglect, the floors sticky with spilled molasses, the walls gray with smoke that had been painted over rather than cleaned. She worked through the night, her body remembering the rhythm of labor, like a cruel song she'd never forgotten. Her mother had been a washerwoman, her father a railroad worker, until his back gave out. Clara had been cleaning other people's messes since she was old enough to hold a brush. When Mr. Hollowell returned at 3 in the morning, he stopped short at the doorway. The ovens gleamed like black mirrors, the floors revealed wood grain no one had seen in years, and Clara was on her knees, scrubbing the last corner with water she'd heated herself. "Jesus Christ," he muttered. "You trying to make me look bad?" Clara stood, her dress now completely ruined, her hands raw and bleeding in places. "Just doing what needs doing." He tossed her an apron. "Well then, might as well learn to bake while you're at it." The days blurred together in a haze of flour and exhaustion. Clara woke at 3, worked until 8 in the evening, then cleaned until she collapsed in the storeroom that was exactly as miserable as promised. The roof did leak, creating a symphony of drips she tried to catch with buckets and pans. The cold was so intense she could see her breath even under 3 thin blankets. But it was hers, this small, damp corner of the world, earned by her own hands. The townspeople were less accepting. When she ventured out for supplies or on bakery errands, whispers followed her like shadows. "That's her, the labor girl. Imagine thinking someone like her could marry Thomas Mercer. I heard she showed up with hands like a field worker." Poor Mr. Mercer. The embarrassment of it all. Clara learned to shop quickly, to keep her eyes down, to become invisible in a way that her presence seemed to refuse. She was too tall, too strong, too obviously marked by work to fade into the background these people preferred for women like her. It was on one of these hurried errands, 3 weeks after her arrival, that she first truly noticed Eli Ward. She was struggling with a sack of flour that had split just as she'd lifted it from the mercantile's loading dock. The white powder exploded across her dress, into her hair, making her look like a ghost of herself. The group of well-dressed ladies nearby tittered behind their gloved hands. "Need help?" The voice was quiet, so quiet she almost missed it beneath the ladies' laughter. Clara looked up to find a man standing beside her, already bending to gather the salvageable flour into a replacement sack he'd somehow procured. He wasn't particularly tall or particularly handsome in the way Thomas Mercer had been. His face was weathered by sun and wind, his clothes practical and worn but clean. His hands, she noticed his hands immediately, were scarred and capable, moving with practiced efficiency. "I can manage," Clara said automatically, the response she'd trained herself to give. "I'm sure you can," he said, continuing to help anyway. But no shame in making a hard job easier. Together, they transferred what flour could be saved. When they finished, he touched the brim of his hat and walked away without another word. Clara stood there, flour-covered and stunned, watching him disappear into the hardware store. Not once had he looked at her with pity or disgust. He'd simply seen a person who needed help and had helped. She learned his name from Mr. Hollowell, who knew everyone in town. "Eli Ward? Runs a small ranch about 5 miles north. Quiet fellow. Keeps to himself mostly. Lost his wife to fever about 4 years back. Good man, though. Pays his debts. Doesn't cause trouble." "Why you asking?" "No reason," Clara said, but she found herself looking for him on her errands. She didn't have to look hard. Eli seemed to appear wherever she struggled most. When she was hauling water from the well in the town square, he was there, taking the bucket from her hands without asking and carrying it to the bakery's back door. When she was trying to patch the storeroom's roof during her one free afternoon, she found a bundle of proper roofing materials left by the door with no note. When the winter wind grew so fierce it threatened to tear the patched door from its hinges, she woke to find it had been reinforced with new lumber and properly sealed. "Someone's sweet on you," Mr. Hollowell observed one morning, pointing to a small pile of firewood that had appeared overnight. "Don't be ridiculous," Clara said, but her heart did something unfamiliar in her chest. The first time Eli actually spoke to her again was at Sunday service. Clara had taken to sitting in the very back pew, arriving last and leaving first to minimize the stares and whispers. But this Sunday, Eli was already there, in that last pew, his hat beside him on the bench. "Morning," he said, sliding over to make room. Clara hesitated. Sitting beside him would start tongues wagging. "Seat's free," he said mildly, as if reading her mind. "And I don't much care what people say." She sat. Through the entire service, she was hyper-aware of him beside her, the steady way he breathed, the rough texture of his coat sleeve when it accidentally brushed hers, the way he sang the hymns in a low, certain voice that somehow made her feel anchored. When the service ended and the congregation began to file out, he turned to her. "You're doing good work at the bakery. Hollowell's bread has improved considerably." "Mr. Hollowell is teaching me," Clara said carefully. "Maybe. But I think you're teaching him a thing or two about hard work." He stood, placed his hat on his head. "Have a good Sunday, Miss Hayes." It was the first time anyone in town had called her Miss Hayes with genuine respect. The encounters continued, brief but consistent. He never pushed, never presumed, never looked at her with the hungry eyes of men who saw her vulnerability as opportunity. He simply existed in her periphery, a steady presence that asked nothing but offered small kindnesses that kept her going through the hardest days. Clara began to look forward to these moments, began to save tiny observations about him like treasures. The way he always removed his hat indoors, even in the feed store. The way he handled horses, firm but gentle, speaking to them in low tones that seemed to calm even the most skittish animals. The way he counted out exact change at the mercantile, never owing anyone anything. She learned from overheard conversations that his ranch was small but well run, that he'd built most of it himself after returning from some unspecified time away, that his wife, Margaret, had been beloved in town, and that many had expected him to sell and leave after her death. But he'd stayed, worked his land alone, attended church but not social functions, existed in Cedar Ridge without really being part of it. Like me, Clara thought one evening as she watched him through the bakery window, loading supplies into his wagon with methodical precision. Winter deepened, and with it came the kind of cold that made Clara's storeroom nearly unbearable. She'd wake with frost on her blankets, her fingers so numb she could barely light the ovens. Mr. Hollowell, not unkind but not particularly concerned either, suggested she might want to find other accommodations before the real cold set in. "This is the real cold, isn't it?" Clara asked through chattering teeth. "Girl, this is autumn playing at winter. Wait until January. That room will kill you sure as shooting. But where could she go? Her wages, meager as they were, barely covered food and basic necessities. The boarding houses were still closed to her, and even if they weren't, she couldn't afford them. She'd rather freeze than beg. It was during this desperate time that Thomas Mercer returned to her life. Clara was delivering bread to the hotel when she saw him in the lobby, holding court with several other well-dressed men. He looked exactly as she remembered, tall, golden-haired, with the kind of handsomeness that demanded attention. When he saw her, his face went through several expressions: surprise, disgust, and finally, a kind of amused pity. "Clara," he called out, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Still in town, I see." She wanted to walk past, to pretend she hadn't heard, but his companions had turned to stare. To flee would be to admit shame. So she stopped, lifted her chin in that practiced gesture. "Mr. Mercer." He sauntered over, his friends following like a pack. "I hope there's no hard feelings about our misunderstanding. You must realize you weren't what was advertised." "I advertised nothing but myself," Clara said quietly. "Yes, well," he laughed, and his friends joined in. "That was the problem, wasn't it? A man expects certain things in a wife: softness, refinement, not, he gestured at her flour-dusted apron, her work-roughened hands. "This. A man expects what he's been taught to value," a quiet voice said from behind Clara. Eli Ward stood in the doorway, his presence somehow filling the space despite his unassuming appearance. He walked past Clara, tipped his hat to her, then faced Thomas. "Mr. Ward," Thomas said, his tone shifting slightly. Eli might be quiet, but he was respected. His word carried weight in business dealings. "This doesn't concern you." "You're right," Eli said mildly. "Just making an observation. Some men value ornaments. Others value strength. Depends what kind of life a man's building, I suppose." The two men stared at each other, something passing between them that Clara couldn't quite read. Finally Thomas laughed, but it sounded forced. "Well, we can't all have your low standards, Ward. Some of us aim higher." "Higher," Eli repeated, as if tasting the word. "Interesting way to put it." He turned to Clara. "Miss Hayes, might I trouble you for some of that bread? My usual order, if you please." Clara nodded, grateful for the excuse to leave. As she walked to the back to fetch Eli's standing order, she heard him say, "Funny thing about aiming high, Mercer. Sometimes you miss what's right in front of you. Other times, you just miss." When she returned with the bread, Thomas and his friends had dispersed. Eli paid her exactly what was owed, then paused. "You deserve better than his words," he said quietly. "I've heard worse," Claire replied. "That doesn't make it right." He tucked the bread under his arm. "The Grange is hiring for harvest season. Kitchen work, but indoor. Pays better than the bakery, and includes proper lodging. Mrs. Patterson runs it fair. She won't care about town gossip if you work hard." "Why are you telling me this?" He looked at her directly then, his dark eyes steady and unreadable. "Because winter's coming, and that storeroom won't hold against it. And because—" He paused, seeming to weigh his words. "Because I know what it's like to be alone in a place that's already decided who you are." He left before she could respond. Clara thought about his words through her shift, through the evening cleaning, through the cold night in her drafty room. The Grange was 20 miles away, a large operation that supplied beef and grain throughout the region. It would mean leaving Cedar Ridge, leaving the routine she'd built, leaving Eli. The thought surprised her with its clarity. Somewhere in the past 2 months, between his quiet kindnesses and steady presence, she'd begun to build something in her mind that she had no right to build. Hope, perhaps, or something more dangerous. She was still contemplating when Mr. Hollowell burst into the bakery the next morning, earlier than usual and agitated. "Got a problem," he announced. "My sister's sick in Denver. I need to go tend to her. Probably be gone 2 weeks, maybe more. Can't close the bakery that long. I'll lose all my customers to Bridgewater's place." "I can run it," Clara said immediately. He looked at her skeptically. "You've only been here 2 months. I know the recipes, the customers, the suppliers. I can do it." He chewed his lip, considering. "I'd have to give you access to the cash box, the credit ledgers. It's a lot of responsibility." "Mr. Hollowell, I could have robbed you blind 12 times over by now, if I was that sort. You know I'm not." He nodded slowly. "Fair point. All right, but I'm only paying you regular wages, plus you can keep any tips. And if anything goes wrong, it won't." He left that afternoon, and suddenly Clara was alone with a bakery to run. The first morning was a disaster. She burned a batch of rolls, forgot to start the coffee, and mixed up 2 orders. But by the second day, she found her rhythm. By the third, she was experimenting with recipes, adding touches of cinnamon to the regular bread, creating a new pastry with leftover dough and preserved apples. Customers began to notice. "This is different," Mrs. Morrison said, biting into the apple pastry. "Better. Did Hollowell change his recipe?" "Just trying something new," Clara said carefully. Word spread. By the end of the first week, she was selling out of pastries by noon. She started making more, started earlier, pushed herself harder. The exhaustion was bone deep, but the satisfaction was something she'd never felt before. This was her work, her innovation, her success. Eli came in on Saturday morning, later than his usual time. The shop was crowded, and Clara was managing 3 orders at once, her movements efficient and sure. When she finally got to him, she was flushed with exertion, but smiling. "The usual?" she asked. "If you have it. Seems you're selling out of everything these days." "People are responding well to some changes." "People are responding to you," he corrected. "The whole town's talking about Hollowell's girl and her magic touch with pastries." "Hollowell's girl," Claire repeated, her smile fading slightly. "That's not how I think of you," Eli said quietly, quiet enough that only she could hear. "But it's progress from what they were calling you before." Before she could respond, the bell above the door chimed violently, and Thomas Mercer entered with a woman on his arm. She was everything Clara wasn't. Petite, pale, dressed in silk and lace with gloves that had never known work. Her tinkling laugh preceded them like an announcement. "Oh, Thomas, what a quaint little shop," the woman said, her voice carrying that particular tone of false delight that meant the opposite. "This is the bakery I mentioned, darling," Thomas said, his eyes finding Clara immediately. "The one with the interesting story." The woman's gaze followed his, landing on Clara with predatory interest. "Oh, is this her? The one who—" "Yes," Thomas said, enjoying the moment. "Clara, meet my fiancée. Miss Victoria Ashworth. She's visiting from San Francisco. Her father owns several mills there." "How fascinating," Victoria said, looking Clara up and down like she was examining livestock. "Thomas told me all about your situation. How brave of you to stay in town after such humiliation. I don't think I could bear it." The shop had gone quiet. Every customer was watching, waiting to see how Clara would respond. She felt the familiar burn of shame, the weight of all their eyes, their judgment. Then she felt something else, a presence beside her. Eli had moved closer, not touching, just standing there, solid and unmovable. "We all bear what we must, Miss Ashworth," Clara said evenly. "Will you be ordering anything?" Victoria laughed, that tinkling sound like breaking glass. "Oh no, I don't eat peasant bread. I just wanted to see, well, to see you, I suppose. Thomas was so upset about the deception, you see, presenting yourself as something you weren't." "I presented myself as exactly what I am," Clara said, her voice steady despite the trembling in her hands. "A woman willing to work hard and build a life with someone. If that wasn't enough, the lack was not in me." "How proud you are," Victoria observed with mock wonder. "For someone in your position. Cleaning ovens, serving your betters, pride seems rather misplaced, doesn't it?" "Pride in honest work is never misplaced," Eli said, his quiet voice somehow cutting through the tension like a blade. "Though I wonder what work you've done to earn yours, Miss Ashworth, beyond being born to a rich father." Victoria's face flushed red. Thomas stepped forward. "Now see here, Ward." "I see fine," Eli interrupted, still in that same mild tone that somehow carried such weight. "I see a man who broke his word to a good woman and now parades his replacement around like a prize cow at a fair. I see a woman who's never earned a single thing she has looking down on someone who's earned everything. And I see a room full of people who should mind their own business and let Miss Hayes get back to hers." The silence was deafening. Then, from the back of the shop, old Mrs. Palmer spoke up. "I'll have 2 of those apple pastries, Clara dear. They're the best thing this town's seen in years." As if her words broke a spell, customers began ordering again, pointedly ignoring Thomas and Victoria. Within moments, the couple found themselves pushed to the back of the line, then out of the shop entirely by the press of bodies. Clara's hand shook as she filled orders, but she kept working, kept moving. Eli stayed exactly where he was, a silent sentinel beside her, until the rush died down and the shop emptied. Only then did he speak. "You all right?" "Why did you do that?" Clara asked, finally meeting his eyes. "You'll make enemies." "Already have plenty. A few more won't matter." He paused, then added, "Besides, someone needed to say it. It wasn't your fight." "No," he agreed, "but I'm making it mine." The weight of those words settled between them, heavy with meaning Clara wasn't ready to examine. Before she could respond, he placed exact change on the counter. "For the bread," he said. "And Miss Hayes? What you said was right. The lack was never in you." He left, and Clara stood alone in the shop that smelled of yeast and cinnamon and possibility. Outside, she could hear the town continuing its usual rhythm, but something had shifted. She'd been defended, publicly and fiercely, by someone who asked nothing in return. She'd been seen not as Hollowell's girl or the labor woman, but as Miss Hayes, deserving of respect. That night, as she lay in her cold storeroom, Clara allowed herself to think about Eli Ward, about his quiet strength, his careful kindness, the way he'd stood beside her like it was the most natural thing in the world. She thought about his wife, Margaret, who'd been beloved, who'd been everything Clara wasn't, accepted, embraced, mourned. What kind of woman earned such devotion from such a man? And more dangerously, Clara thought about what it might be like to be loved by someone who saw her exactly as she was and stood beside her anyway. The thought was too big, too frightening, too impossible for a woman in her position. So she pushed it down, buried it beneath plans for tomorrow's baking, beneath recipes and orders and the 1,000 small tasks that made up her days. But like yeast in warm dough, the feeling grew anyway, expanding in the quiet darkness until it filled all the empty spaces she'd tried so hard to keep hollow. Winter arrived 3 days later with a vengeance, bringing snow that piled against the doors and wind that found every crack in the storeroom's walls. Clara woke to find ice had formed inside the room, her breath visible in the moonlight, her body shaking so violently she could barely stand. She stumbled down to the ovens, started them with numb fingers, and huddled against their warmth until sensation returned to her limbs. She was still there, wrapped in every piece of clothing she owned, when someone knocked on the back door at 4:30 in the morning. Opening it, she found Eli standing in the swirling snow, his coat dusted white, his face grim. "Get your things," he said without preamble. "What?" "That room's going to kill you. I could see your lamp flickering all night. You were shaking so hard it was moving. Get your things. I'm taking you to the Grange." "It's 20 miles in a blizzard. My wagon's right here. Got hot bricks and blankets. We leave now. We can make it before the worst hits." He stepped inside, saw her huddled against the ovens, and something shifted in his face. "Clara, please, don't be proud about this. Not when it could cost your life." "Why do you care?" The question escaped before she could stop it. He was quiet for a long moment, snow melting on his shoulders, his dark eyes steady on hers. "You know why," he said simply. And she did. God help her, she did. Clara stood frozen in the bakery's warmth, staring at Eli while his words hung between them like a bridge she wasn't sure she could cross. Outside, the wind howled its urgency, but inside, time seemed to pause, waiting for her answer. "I can't leave," she finally said, gesturing at the ovens, the rising dough covered with cloths, the orders written in her careful hand. "Mr. Hollowell trusted me with his shop. People are expecting their bread. People can survive one day without bread. You won't survive another night in that room." His voice carried an edge she'd never heard before, something raw beneath his usual calm. "I've already sent word to Mrs. Patterson at the Grange. She's expecting you." "You had no right." "I had every right of someone who gives a damn whether you live or die." The words came out harsh, and he immediately softened his tone. "Clara, I've watched you work yourself to the bone these past months. I've seen you take every insult this town could throw and stand taller for it. But there's brave and there's foolish, and freezing to death for pride is the latter." She wanted to argue, wanted to maintain the independence she'd fought so hard to build, but another violent shiver ran through her body, betraying her weakness. Eli saw it and pressed his advantage. "One day," he said, "let me take you to the Grange, get you settled. If you hate it, if you want to come back, I'll bring you back myself when the weather clears. But give yourself this chance. Please." The please did it. This man who asked for nothing, who gave without expecting return, was asking her for something. Clara found herself nodding. "Let me bank the ovens and leave a note." She moved through the familiar motions of securing the bakery, her hands steadier now with purpose. She wrote a careful note explaining the emergency closure, though she doubted anyone would venture out in this weather anyway. When she climbed the narrow stairs to the storeroom one last time, she packed quickly. There wasn't much to pack. Her mother's Bible, the few clothes that weren't completely worn through, the small wooden box that held her savings, and tucked in the very bottom of her suitcase, the letters from Thomas Mercer that she didn't know why she kept. Eli was waiting by his wagon when she came down, and he took her suitcase without comment, storing it carefully beneath a tarp. The wagon bed was lined with straw and blankets, hot bricks wrapped in burlap placed strategically for warmth. He helped her up to the bench, his hand strong and steady on her elbow, then wrapped a thick buffalo robe around her shoulders. "This was Margaret's," he said quietly, and Clara stiffened. "I can't." She would have wanted it used. She was practical that way. He climbed up beside her, taking the reins. "Ready?" Clara nodded, pulling the robe closer. It smelled faintly of lavender and leather, of a life lived and lost. The wagon lurched forward into the swirling white, and Cedar Ridge began to disappear behind them. They rode in silence for the first hour, the only sounds the creak of wheels and the wind trying to tear them from their path. Eli handled the horses with sure hands, navigating by instinct more than sight. Clara found herself studying his profile, the way ice crystals formed on his eyelashes, the determined set of his jaw. "Tell me about the Grange," she said, needing to break the silence that felt too intimate in their shared cocoon of warmth. "It's a good operation. Fair wages, decent quarters for workers. Mrs. Patterson lost her husband last year, but she's keeping it running. She's tough but kind. Reminds me of you, actually." I'm not kind, Clara said automatically. You're kinder than you know. I've seen you slip extra rolls to the widow Martinez when she counts out her pennies. I've watched you save the burnt edges for yourself so customers get the best pieces. That's kindness, Clara. The real sort, not the performed kind this town specializes in. How do you see all that? A small smile played at the corner of his mouth. I pay attention to what matters. They stopped twice to rest the horses and check directions. Both times, Eli produced a thermos of hot coffee from beneath the seat, sharing it with her in comfortable silence. The storm worsened as they traveled, but he never showed concern, just adjusted their course and continued on. Were you always a rancher? Clara asked during their second stop. No, spent some time in the army, then worked railroad construction for a while. Came here about 6 years ago, bought the land cheap because nobody else wanted it. Built it up piece by piece. He paused, then added, Margaret helped with the building. She was stronger than she looked. You must miss her. Every day. The admission was simple, without drama. But missing her doesn't mean I stopped living. She would have had words for me if I had. Clara thought about that as they continued their journey, about loss and continuation, about the difference between surviving and living. She'd been surviving since the day she was born, it seemed. What would living look like? The Grange appeared through the snow like a small city, its collection of buildings sprawling across the white landscape. The main house was 3 stories of solid timber and stone, smoke rising from multiple chimneys promising warmth within. Barns and bunkhouses surrounded it, all well-maintained despite the harsh weather. Mrs. Patterson met them at the door, a woman in her 50s with steel-gray hair and hands that, like Clara's, knew work. She took one look at Clara's blue lips and shaking form and immediately ushered her inside. Good Lord, Eli, she's half frozen. Come, girl, let's get you warm. The house was everything Clara had never experienced, warm, spacious, filled with the smell of bread and soup and comfort. Mrs. Patterson led her to the kitchen where a massive stove radiated heat, pushed her into a chair, and wrapped another blanket around her shoulders. Eat, she commanded, placing a bowl of thick stew in front of Clara. Then we'll talk terms. Clara ate, aware of Eli standing by the door, snow melting from his coat. When she finished, Mrs. Patterson sat across from her with the direct manner of someone who had no time for pretense. Eli says you're a worker. I need workers. The job's kitchen work. Cooking for 30 hands, keeping house, managing supplies. 6 days a week, Sundays off, room and board included. Wages are twice what you're making at that bakery. Interested? Why would you hire me without references? Eli Ward's word is reference enough. Man doesn't speak often, so when he does, I listen. She studied Clara with sharp eyes. Besides, I heard about you. The woman who came to marry Thomas Mercer and got turned away for having working hands. Well, I've got no use for soft hands here. What I need is someone who won't faint at the sight of butchering and can make 30 hungry men stop complaining about the food. Can you do that? Yes. Then you start tomorrow. Eli, you staying the night? Storm's getting worse. I'd better head back. Animals to tend. He moved toward the door, then stopped, turning to Clara. You'll do well here. Eli, she called as he reached for the handle. Thank you. He nodded once and was gone, leaving Clara in this warm, unfamiliar place with a job she hadn't sought and a future she hadn't planned. Mrs. Patterson showed her to her room, a real room, with solid walls and a window and a bed with an actual mattress. Clara sat on it in wonder, bouncing slightly to confirm it was real. This is mine? Long as you work here, yes. There's 3 other girls in the house, Mary, Susan, and Beth. They'll help you learn the routines. We serve breakfast at 5, lunch at noon, dinner at 6. The hands are rough but respectful. I don't tolerate otherwise. Questions? Why are you trusting me? Mrs. Patterson smiled, the first soft expression Clara had seen from her. Because I was you once. Different story, same ending, alone in a place that didn't want me, saved by work and kindness from unexpected sources. Besides, Eli Ward doesn't stick his neck out for just anyone. The fact that he did for you tells me everything I need to know. Clara lay in her warm bed that night, listening to the storm rage outside walls that didn't leak, under blankets that weren't threadbare, and thought about unexpected kindness, about Eli driving 20 miles in a blizzard to save her from her pride, about Mrs. Patterson offering her not just a job, but dignity, about the possibility that she might be worth saving after all. The work at the Grange was harder than the bakery in some ways, easier in others. The kitchen was enormous, equipped with everything needed to feed a small army. The other girls were cautious at first, but when they saw Clara could work without complaint and wasn't above any task, they warmed to her. Mary, a cheerful redhead from Ireland, became particularly friendly. "You're the one who was supposed to marry Thomas Mercer," she said one morning as they kneaded bread together. "Lucky escape, that." "You know him?" Every woman in 3 counties knows to avoid Thomas Mercer. Handsome as sin and twice as rotten. He went through 2 other mail-order brides before you. Did you know that? Sent them both packing for not meeting his standards. Clara's hand stilled. Others? Oh yes, makes a game of it, I think. Orders women like catalog goods, then finds fault when they arrive. Heard his new fiancée is rich though, so maybe he'll actually go through with it this time. The information should have made Clara feel better, knowing she wasn't the first or only one rejected. Instead, it made her angry. How many women had made that journey full of hope only to be discarded? The days at the Grange fell into rhythm. Wake at 4, start the fires, begin breakfast. Feed 30 men who ate like they'd never see food again. Clean, prepare lunch, serve, clean again. Dinner was the biggest production, requiring hours of preparation. By 8 at night, Clara would fall into bed exhausted but satisfied. The wages were indeed double what she'd made at the bakery, and for the first time in her life, she was saving money that might actually amount to something. Sundays were her only free days, and she found herself returning to Cedar Ridge for church services, partly from habit and partly from hope. Eli was always there, in that back pew, and he always made room for her. They didn't speak much, but the silence was comfortable, companionable. It was on her 4th Sunday that things changed. Clara arrived to find the church buzzing with gossip. Thomas Mercer's wedding to Victoria Ashworth was set for the following month, to be the social event of the season. Victoria herself was holding court outside the church, surrounded by admiring ladies, her dress more suited to San Francisco society than a frontier town. "Of course, we're having the dress made in Paris," Victoria was saying as Clara tried to pass unnoticed. "Thomas insists on the best. He has such refined taste. He could never settle for anything common." Her eyes found Clara then, and her smile sharpened. "Oh, Clara." "Still here? I thought you'd moved on to the Grange. How appropriate, from bakery to kitchen. Some people just find their level, don't they?" The crowd of ladies tittered. Clara felt the familiar burn of humiliation, but before she could respond, someone else did. "Indeed they do," came a voice from behind Clara. But it wasn't Eli. It was Mrs. Patterson, dressed in her Sunday best, looking like a force of nature. "Which is why I find it curious that you're marrying Thomas Mercer, Miss Ashworth. Your level must be quite low indeed to settle for a man who makes sport of humiliating women." Victoria's face went red. "How dare you?" "I dare, because I've lived here longer than you've been alive, girl. I knew Thomas's mother, God rest her soul, and she'd be horrified at what her son's become. A man who orders brides like merchandise, then discards them for not meeting specifications he never made clear? That's not refined taste, that's cruelty dressed up in a fancy coat." Thomas was deceived. Thomas deceived himself, thinking he could order a wife like a suit from a catalog and get exactly what he imagined. Clara here presented herself honestly. The deception was all in Thomas's head, between what he wanted to see and what was real. Mrs. Patterson took Clara's arm. "Come, dear, let's find better company inside." As they walked toward the church, Clara whispered, "You didn't have to do that." "Yes, I did. I told you I was you once. And if more people had stood up for me then, maybe my path would have been easier." She patted Clara's hand. "Besides, I quite enjoyed the look on that little peacock's face." Inside the church, Eli was already in the back pew. His eyes found Clara immediately, taking in her flushed face, Mrs. Patterson's protective stance. He stood as they approached, something passing between him and Mrs. Patterson. "Room for 2 more?" Mrs. Patterson asked. "Always," Eli replied, sliding over. Clara found herself between them, protected on both sides. and for the first time since arriving in Cedar Ridge, she felt truly safe in this space. The service proceeded, but she barely heard it, too aware of these two people who had chosen to stand with her, who saw her value when others saw only her lacks. After the service, Eli walked them to Mrs. Patterson's wagon. "Trouble?" he asked quietly. "Nothing we couldn't handle," Mrs. Patterson replied, "though that Ashworth girl has a mouth on her that needs watching." "She'll learn," Eli said mildly. "They always do." As Mrs. Patterson checked the horses, Eli turned to Clara. "You look well. The Grange suits you. It's good work, honest work. All your work is honest." He paused, seeming to weigh his words. "I've been thinking. The Grange is good for now, but you deserve more than kitchen work forever. You've got a mind for business. I saw it at the bakery. You shouldn't waste that. Women like me don't get to run businesses, Eli. Women like you are exactly who should run businesses. You understand work, value, what it takes to build something from nothing." He pulled something from his pocket, a folded newspaper page. "There's a property for sale in town. Small shop, living quarters above. Owner died, bank selling it cheap. Could be anything, bakery, goods store, whatever someone with vision wanted to make it." Clara took the paper with trembling hands. The price listed was more than she had, but not impossibly so. "Why are you showing me this?" "Because you should know it exists. Because you should know there are possibilities beyond what this town thinks you deserve." He touched his hat. "Think about it." He walked away before she could respond, leaving Clara holding a future she'd never imagined possible. That night, she showed the advertisement to Mary, who whistled low. "That's the old Henderson place. Good location, solid building. But Clara, you'd be competing with established businesses, and a woman alone running a shop? This town would make it hard. This town makes everything hard for me already." "Fair point." Mary studied the paper. "You could do it, though. You've got the grit for it." Clara lay awake that night thinking, not just about the shop, but about Eli's faith in her, about Mrs. Patterson's defense, about the possibility that she might be more than just someone who survived. She might be someone who thrived. The next morning brought unexpected news. Mr. Hollowell had returned from Denver and wanted to see her. Clara got permission from Mrs. Patterson to go, riding to town with a supply wagon. The bakery looked different somehow, smaller. Mr. Hollowell was behind the counter, looking harried. "Clara!" "Thank God. Look, I'll be straight with you. Business has been slow since you left. People keep asking for those pastries you made, those changes you did. I can't replicate them. I left the recipes. It's not the recipes, it's something else. The way you did it, I don't know." He rubbed his face. "I want to offer you a deal. Come back, I'll make you a partner. 60-40 split my favor since I own the building, but you'd have say in the business, your name on the sign." Clara stared at him. "You rejected me when I first asked for fair wages. Now you want to make me a partner? I was wrong. There, I said it. You've got something, talent, instinct, whatever you want to call it. People responded to your work. Hell, even that Ward fellow came in yesterday asking if you'd be coming back." "Eli was here?" "Every day since you left, actually. Orders his bread, looks around like he's hoping to see you, leaves. Man's got it bad, if you ask me." Clara's heart did something complicated in her chest. "I need to think about your offer." "Don't think too long. Bridgewater's been stealing my customers, and I need you back soon if we're going to recover." Clara left the bakery in turmoil. A partnership was more than she'd ever dreamed, but was it enough? And what did it mean that Eli came looking for her every day? She found herself walking toward his usual supply stop, the feed store, where he'd be this time of day if he was in town. He was there, loading sacks into his wagon, and he looked up as if sensing her approach. "Clara." Her name in his mouth sounded like a prayer. "Mr. Hollowell offered me a partnership." His hands stilled on the sacks. "That's good. You deserve it." "Is it what I deserve, or is it just better than what I had?" He turned to face her fully then. "What do you want, Clara? Not what's offered, not what's available, but what do you actually want?" The question hung between them, bigger than just the bakery, bigger than business. Clara found herself stepping closer. "I want to build something that's mine." I want to never again be dependent on someone else's goodwill or tolerance. I want... She stopped, courage failing. What else? I want to stop being alone, she whispered. His hand reached out, not quite touching her, but close enough that she could feel the warmth. You're not alone. Not anymore. Eli, take the partnership, he said suddenly. Take it. Save your money. Buy that shop when you're ready. Build your empire. Just... He paused, vulnerability flickering across his weathered face. Build it here. Stay here. Why? You know why. There it was again, that truth between them, unnamed but undeniable. Clara wanted to reach for it, for him, but the street was full of eyes, always watching, always judging. I should get back to the Grange. Clara. Her name again, stopping her. Whatever you decide, know this. You've already won. They wanted to break you, make you small, make you leave. Instead, you're being offered partnerships, defending yourself with dignity, making choices about your own future. You've already won. She carried those words back to the Grange like treasures. That night, she wrote 2 letters, one to Mr. Hollowell accepting his partnership with conditions of her own, and one to the bank inquiring about the Henderson property. She was done letting life happen to her. It was time to make life happen. The news of Clara's partnership in the bakery spread through Cedar Ridge like wildfire. Some were scandalized, a woman who'd been rejected as a bride now being a business owner. Others were quietly supportive, especially those who'd tasted her pastries and wanted them back. Clara negotiated hard with Mr. Hollowell. She would not live in the storeroom again. He would pay for proper lodging, or she would continue living at the Grange and travel. Her name would be on the sign equally with his. She would have full say in recipes and innovations. He agreed to everything, desperate to get his customers back. The day the new sign went up, Hollowell and Hayes Bakery, Clara stood outside looking at her name in bold letters. Real, permanent, hers. It suits you, Eli said from beside her. She hadn't heard him approach. It's just a sign. It's a declaration. You're not hiding anymore. She turned to him. I was never hiding. I was just waiting. For what? To be worth something. His hand found hers then, right there on Main Street where anyone could see. You were always worth everything. You just needed to see it yourself. Thomas Mercer chose that moment to walk by with Victoria. He stopped short, seeing the sign, seeing Clara and Eli's joined hands. Well, he said, his voice carrying that familiar sneer, how the mighty have fallen. From potential wife to common merchant. Clara felt Eli tense beside her, but she squeezed his hand, holding him back. Actually, Thomas, I've risen. From someone begging for acceptance to someone who earned it. From someone willing to marry a stranger for survival to someone who can choose her own path. If that's falling in your eyes, I'm happy to fall forever. Victoria tugged at Thomas's arm. Come, darling, we have wedding preparations to discuss. As they walked away, Clara heard Victoria say, Why do you let her speak to you that way? Thomas's response was lost in the wind, but Clara didn't care. She had work to do. The weeks following the sign's installation brought changes Clara hadn't anticipated. The bakery thrived under their partnership, with Mr. Hollowell handling the morning bread production while Clara created her pastries and managed the books. She'd discovered an aptitude for numbers, for seeing patterns in sales and predicting what would sell when. But success brought its own challenges. You're getting above yourself, Mrs. Whitmore announced one morning, having deigned to enter the bakery for the first time since Clara's return. A woman in business, unmarried, carrying on with that Ward fellow in plain sight. It's unseemly. Clara continued boxing the tea cakes Mrs. Whitmore had ordered, her hand steady despite the anger building in her chest. Will that be all, Mrs. Whitmore? Don't you take that tone with me, girl. You might have fooled some people into thinking you're respectable, but we all know what you really are. And what's that? Clara asked, meeting the woman's eyes directly. A climber. Using that poor widower's affections to establish yourself. He deserves better than someone who sees him as a stepping stone. The accusation hit deeper than any insult about Clara's own worth. The idea that anyone might think she was using Eli, that good man who'd shown her nothing but kindness, made her sick. Mrs. Whitmore, Clara said, her voice dangerously quiet. I've taken your insults about my person, my background, my worth, but if you speak one more word suggesting I'm taking advantage of Eli Ward, I'll ban you from this establishment permanently. You wouldn't dare. I'm one of your best customers. Try me. They stared at each other across the counter, and it was Mrs. Whitmore who looked away first. She left with her packages, her back rigid with indignation, and Clara knew she'd made an enemy, but she couldn't bring herself to care, not when Eli's reputation was at stake. Mr. Hollowell emerged from the back room, flour-dusted and frowning. You shouldn't antagonize her. She's got influence. She insulted Eli. So, he's a grown man, he can handle himself? He shouldn't have to. Not on my account. Hollowell studied her with an expression she couldn't read. You're in love with him. It wasn't a question, but Clara answered anyway. That's not your concern. It is if it affects the business. If you marry Ward, you'll leave the bakery. Who says I'd leave? Who says marriage means giving up what I've built? Every law and custom in this country, for starters. He was right, and they both knew it. Marriage would mean becoming Eli's property in the eyes of the law, her business assets transferred to his control. Everything she'd worked for would cease to be hers. That evening, Clara walked to the small cemetery at the edge of town. She'd taken to visiting sometimes, drawn to the quiet and the perspective it offered. She found herself at Margaret Ward's grave, reading the simple inscription, "Beloved wife, faithful friend." I don't know what to do, Clara said to the stone. I care for him, your husband. But I've worked so hard to own something, to be something. How do I choose between love and independence? Did you have to choose? The wind whispered through the grass, offering no answers. But as Clara stood to leave, she noticed something she'd missed before, a small addition to the stone, nearly hidden by creeping vine. She built her own light. Clara traced the words with her finger, wondering who had added them, though in her heart she knew. Eli had given his wife this final gift, this recognition that she'd been more than just his spouse. She'd been her own person, with her own light. When Clara returned to town, she found chaos. A crowd had gathered outside the church, voices raised in excitement and scandal. Mary from the Grange grabbed Clara's arm as she tried to pass. You haven't heard? Thomas Mercer's wedding is off. Victoria caught him with another woman, that traveling singer from the saloon. She's leaving on the evening train, swearing she'll ruin him in San Francisco society. Clara felt no satisfaction at the news, only a tired sort of pity. Thomas had finally met someone who could hurt him the way he'd hurt others. She pushed through the crowd, intending to return to the bakery, but found Thomas himself standing in her path. He looked disheveled, his usually perfect appearance marred by distress. This is your fault, he said, his voice slurred with drink. I haven't spoken to you in weeks, Thomas. You cursed me. First bride who ever rejected me, and everything's gone wrong since. He swayed closer, and Clara could smell the whiskey. Should have been you. You should have been grateful I even considered you. Step back, Thomas. Don't tell me what to do. You're nothing but a jumped-up servant girl playing at business. He grabbed her arm, his grip painful. You owe me for the humiliation. He never finished the sentence. A fist connected with his jaw, sending him sprawling into the mud. Eli stood over him, his usually calm demeanor replaced by something dangerous. Touch her again, and you'll answer to me. Thomas struggled to his feet, mud dripping from his formerly fine clothes. You're welcome to my leavings, Ward. Enjoy your peasant bride. Eli stepped forward, but Clara caught his arm. He's not worth it. Thomas laughed bitterly. Listen to her, Ward. She's got you well trained already. Just wait until she gets bored playing baker and wants more. Women like her always want more. You're right, Clara said, surprising everyone, including herself. I do want more. I want respect, independence, the right to make my own choices. I want to build something lasting. I want to be with someone who sees me as a partner, not a possession. I want everything you could never give and everything you'll never have. So yes, Thomas, I want more. And I'm going to get it. She turned her back on him, taking Eli's arm. Walk me home? They left Thomas in the mud, the crowd parting for them with whispers following in their wake. Clara knew this would be the talk of the town for weeks, but she found she didn't care. "Your hand," she said once they were away from the crowd, taking his bruised knuckles gently in hers. "Worth it. You didn't have to defend me. I can handle Thomas Mercer." "I know you can. But you shouldn't have to, not alone." They'd reached the small boarding house where Clara now rented a room, a respectable place that had suddenly found vacancy once her business partnership was established. She should go inside, maintain propriety, but instead she found herself sitting on the front step, pulling Eli down beside her. "Mrs. Whitmore thinks I'm using you, taking advantage of your affections to establish myself." "Mrs. Whitmore is an idiot." "But what if others think it too? What if they're right? You've done so much for me, Eli. What if I'm unconsciously—" "Clara, stop." He turned to face her fully. "Do you know when I first noticed you?" "Really noticed you?" She shook her head. "The day you arrived. I was at the station, picking up supplies. I saw Mercer reject you, saw you stand there with your chin up, refusing to cry, refusing to break. I thought, there's someone who knows how to endure. That's not exactly romantic. Let me finish. I went home that night and couldn't stop thinking about you. Not because you were pretty, though you are. Not because I pitied you, because pity was the last thing that proud woman at the station would want. I thought about you because I recognized something in you I'd felt in myself. That determination to keep standing when everything's trying to knock you down." He took her hand, his thumb tracing the calluses that would never fully fade. "Every kindness I showed you was selfish, Clara. I wanted to be near you, to see you succeed, to maybe earn a smile. You don't owe me anything. If anything, I owe you." "For what?" "For reminding me I could feel something again. After Margaret died, I thought that part of me was buried with her. Then you came along with your stubborn pride and your capable hands and your refusal to be made small, and I felt my heart wake up." Clara's eyes burned with unshed tears. "Eli, I'm not asking for anything. I know you've got plans, ambitions. I'd never ask you to give those up. I just wanted you to know that nothing you do or don't do changes how I feel. You could marry someone else tomorrow or stay single forever, and I'd still be grateful just to have known you." "What if I don't want to marry someone else?" The words escaped before she could stop them. "What if I want, but I also want to keep my business, my independence? The law says I can't have both." "The law says a lot of things. Doesn't mean people can't find their own way around them." He stood, helping her to her feet. "Think about it, Clara. There's no rush. I'm not going anywhere." He tipped his hat and walked away, leaving Clara on her doorstep with her heart racing and her mind spinning with possibilities. The next morning brought an unexpected visitor to the bakery. Clara was elbow-deep in dough when a well-dressed woman entered, her bearing regal despite her simple clothes. She was perhaps 60, with silver hair and sharp eyes that reminded Clara of a hawk. "Miss Hayes? I'm Mrs. Benjamin Cross. I believe you knew my nephew, Thomas Mercer." Clara's defenses rose immediately. "If you're here to blame me for his broken engagement—" "On the contrary, I'm here to thank you." The woman smiled at Clara's shocked expression. "May we speak privately?" Clara led her to the small office she'd created in the back room. Mrs. Cross settled into the chair with natural grace, her eyes taking in everything. "Thomas is my late sister's boy. I've watched him become cruel and petty, using his looks and charm to hurt others. You're the first woman to stand up to him publicly, to refuse to be diminished by his rejection. I wasn't trying to make a statement. The best statements rarely are intentional. Miss Hayes, I own several businesses in Denver. I came to Cedar Ridge to deal with Thomas. His behavior has begun affecting our family's reputation. But I find I'm more interested in you." "Me?" "A woman who arrives with nothing, gets rejected publicly, yet within 6 months has a business partnership and the respect of people like Eli Ward and Mrs. Patterson? That's someone worth knowing." Clara didn't know how to respond to such direct praise. Mrs. Cross continued, "I'm particularly interested in your business acumen. Thomas mentioned, spitefully of course, that you'd transformed Hollowell's mediocre bakery into something special. I'd like to propose a business arrangement." "What kind of arrangement?" "I supply several hotels and restaurants in Denver, good establishments that pay well for quality goods. If you could supply pastries and specialty breads, I could guarantee consistent orders. Large ones. Clara's mind raced with possibilities. We'd need to expand, hire more help, possibly get another oven. All manageable with the right investment. Mrs. Cross pulled out a card. Think about it. I'll be in town for another week, settling Thomas's debts and reputation. He'll be returning to Denver with me, by the way. His father thinks some time working in our warehouses might teach him humility. After Mrs. Cross left, Clara stood in her bakery, looking at the card that could change everything. Denver contracts would mean real money, real growth. It would also mean more time away from Cedar Ridge, from Eli. Big thoughts? Mr. Hollowell asked, entering from the storeroom. Clara showed him the card. His eyes widened. Benjamin Cross Industries? Clara, that's enormous. We could triple our business. We'd need investment capital, new equipment, more space, additional workers. I know someone who might invest, Hollowell said carefully. Eli Ward. Man's got more saved than he'd ever spend on himself. I couldn't ask him. Business is business. If it's a good investment, why not? Unless you're worried about mixing business with other things. That evening, Clara found herself at Eli's ranch for the first time. She'd ridden out on a borrowed horse, the card burning in her pocket, her mind full of questions. The ranch was modest but well-maintained, everything in its place and purposeful. The house was single-story, built of local stone and timber, with a wide porch that faced the sunset. Eli emerged from the barn as she approached, surprise flickering across his features. Clara? Is everything all right? Yes. Number? I don't know. She dismounted awkwardly, still not comfortable with horses. I need advice, business advice. He led her to the porch, gesturing to a worn but comfortable chair. Tell me. She explained about Mrs. Cross, the opportunity, the expansion it would require. Eli listened without interrupting, his expression thoughtful. It's a good opportunity, he said when she finished. The Cross name carries weight. What's holding you back? Investment. We'd need capital I don't have. I could invest. I didn't come here to ask, I know, but I'm offering anyway. It's a sound investment, Clara. The contracts alone would guarantee return. He paused. But that's not really what's bothering you, is it? Clara looked out at the land stretching toward the mountains. Success means change. Maybe leaving Cedar Ridge eventually, if the business grows enough. It means choosing the bakery over other possibilities. Why does it have to be a choice? Because that's how the world works, Eli. Women don't get to have everything. Margaret did. Clara turned to him surprised. She ran a dairy business. Small, but profitable. She sold to most of the town, managed her own books, made her own decisions. We kept our finances separate, had to use some creative paperwork, but we managed it. The law assumes a lot of things. But if a woman's business exists before marriage, if the right papers are drawn up, if both parties agree, there are ways. He stood, walking to the porch rail. I'm not saying this to pressure you, Clara. I'm saying it because you should know all your options before you decide anything. You'd be willing to do that? Have a wife who ran her own business, kept her own money? I'd be willing to have a partner who chose to build a life with me while still building her own dreams. The question is whether you'd want that. Clara stood, moving to stand beside him. The sunset painted the landscape gold and red, beautiful and vast and full of possibility. I need to think. Take all the time you need. She stayed for dinner, simple fare that Eli prepared with the same quiet competence he did everything. They talked about safer things, the ranch, the bakery, the coming winter. But underneath, the bigger questions hummed between them. As she prepared to leave, Eli caught her hand. Whatever you decide about the investment, the expansion, us, know that I'm proud of you. The woman who stood on that train platform would be amazed at who you've become. She'd be amazed at who was willing to stand beside her, Clara replied softly. The ride back to town was full of stars and thoughts. Clara had choices now, real choices, not just the desperate scramble for survival. The weight of that was both thrilling and terrifying. Over the next few days, Clara threw herself into planning. She met with Mrs. Cross again, negotiating terms, discussing logistics. The woman was sharp but fair, and Clara found herself learning from every conversation. "You remind me of myself at your age," Mrs. Cross said over tea in the hotel's parlor, determined to prove that a woman could succeed in business on merit alone. "Did you?" "Succeed, I mean. Beyond my wildest dreams. But it cost me things, too. Marriage, children, conventional happiness. I don't regret my choices, but I wonder sometimes about paths not taken. What if someone didn't want conventional happiness? What if they wanted something different?" Mrs. Cross studied her shrewdly. "Then I'd say that someone should be very sure of what they do want before making any decisions, and very sure of who they're making them with." That Sunday, Thomas Mercer left town. Clara watched from the bakery window as his carriage rolled past, his aunt beside him. He looked smaller somehow, diminished. Their eyes met for a moment through the glass, and Clara saw something she hadn't expected: recognition. He nodded once, slightly, an acknowledgement of something, her victory perhaps, or his defeat, or simply the end of their strange, painful connection. Then he was gone, and Clara felt a chapter of her life close. "Good riddance," Mr. Hollowell muttered from behind her. "He was just a man who didn't know what he really wanted," Clara said, surprising herself with the lack of bitterness in her voice. "And you do? Know what you want?" Clara turned from the window. "I'm beginning to." That afternoon she found Eli at church in their usual pew, but this time, instead of leaving after service, she asked him to walk with her. They strolled through the cemetery, past Margaret Stone, to a small hill that overlooked the valley. Clara had rehearsed this conversation a dozen times, but now, faced with the moment, all her prepared words fled. "I want to accept Mrs. Cross's offer," she began. "You should. It's a wonderful opportunity. I want to accept your investment too, but as a proper business arrangement, interest and terms and everything official. Of course. And I want—" She stopped, gathering courage. "I want to build something with you, Eli. Not conventional, not traditional, but ours. I want partnership in every sense: business, life, love. I want to keep my name on the bakery sign and add it to yours. I want separate books and shared dreams. I want to prove that a woman can have love and independence both." Eli was quiet for so long that Clara's heart began to sink. Then he spoke, his voice rough with emotion. "I want to wake up beside someone who chose me freely, not from necessity or convention. I want a partner who challenges me, who builds alongside me rather than behind me. I want to watch you conquer the business world and come home to tell me about it over dinner." He turned to her, taking both her hands. "I want you, Clara, exactly as you are and everything you're becoming. People will talk. They'll say it's improper, unconventional. Let them. We'll be too busy living to listen." Clara laughed, feeling lighter than she had in months. "Is that a proposal, Mr. Ward?" "It's whatever you want it to be, Miss Hayes." She considered, then pulled him down for a kiss that was definitely improper for a cemetery on a Sunday afternoon. "It's a beginning," she said when they parted. "Let's see where it takes us." As they walked back to town, hand in hand, Clara thought about the woman who'd stepped off that train 6 months ago, desperate, humiliated, with nothing but determination and work-worn hands. That woman could never have imagined this moment, these possibilities, this choice. But that woman had done something vital. She'd refused to break. She'd taken each blow and stayed standing, worked when work was all she had, maintained her dignity when dignity was all she owned. She'd laid the foundation for this moment with every floor scrubbed, every bread baked, every insult weathered with her chin up. The bakery sign caught the late afternoon sun as they approached, Hollowell and Hayes gleaming like a promise. Soon there would be expansion, Denver contracts, perhaps even multiple locations. There would be challenges and setbacks, certainly. The path Clara was choosing, business owner and wife, independent and partnered, wouldn't be easy. But easy had never been her portion anyway. She'd been built for harder things, stronger things. She'd been built to last. "Shall we tell Mr. Hollowell about the investment?" Eli asked as they reached the bakery door. "Tomorrow," Clara said. "Today, I just want to enjoy this." "This?" "Standing in front of my business with my future partner, knowing I chose both freely." She squeezed his hand. "That girl at the train station would be astounded." "She shouldn't be," Eli said softly. "This was always in her." She just needed time to let it grow. Through the bakery window, Clara could see the ovens waiting, the workspace where she'd built her new life one pastry at a time. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities, new mountains to climb. But today, she stood in the doorway between her past and her future, holding the hand of a man who saw her worth when the rest of the world saw only her lacks, owner of a business that bore her name, creator of her own destiny. The word ugly that had haunted her arrival in Cedar Ridge seemed like something from another lifetime, a cruel fiction told about a woman who no longer existed. In her place stood Clara Hayes, baker, business owner, and soon-to-be bride on her own terms. The sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and possibility. And Clara stepped forward into her life, ready for whatever came next, knowing she'd meet it standing tall. The expansion began immediately, with Eli's investment providing the capital and Mrs. Cross's contracts providing the motivation. Within a week, contractors were measuring the bakery for additional ovens, and Clara was interviewing potential workers. But not everyone in Cedar Ridge was pleased with her success. "It's unnatural," Clara overheard Mrs. Whitmore telling a group of ladies outside the mercantile. "A woman running a business, taking investment from a man she's not even married to, conducting affairs with Denver society. Mark my words, this will end in scandal." Clara kept walking, but the words stung. She'd expected resistance, but the reality of it, the constant whispers, the cold shoulders from certain members of society, wore on her more than she'd anticipated. That evening, as she reviewed contracts in the bakery office, Mr. Hollowell knocked on the doorframe. "You've got a visitor." Clara looked up to find her sister standing in the doorway. Anna, whom she hadn't seen in 3 years, dressed in traveling clothes that had seen better days, her face drawn with exhaustion. "Anna?" Clara stood, shocked. "What are you doing here?" "I heard about you. About your success here. I need help, Clara." The last time they'd spoken, Anna had made it clear she was ashamed of Clara's working-class status, ashamed of their family's poverty. She'd married a clerk and moved to Chicago, cutting all ties. Now she stood in Clara's office, pride warring with desperation on her face. "My husband died," Anna said simply. "Tuberculosis, left me with debts and no way to pay them. I remembered hearing about a Clara Hayes who'd become a business owner in Colorado, and I prayed it was you." Clara studied her sister, seeing the familiar features marked by hardship. Part of her wanted to turn Anna away, to remind her of the rejection, the shame she'd inflicted. But that wasn't who Clara had become. "You can stay with me," Clara said. "There's work here if you're willing." Anna's eyes filled with tears. "You do that? After how I treated you? We're family. That doesn't change no matter what's passed between us." Anna collapsed into a chair, sobbing with relief. Clara knelt beside her, offering comfort to the sister who'd once been too proud to acknowledge her. It was a strange reversal, but life had taught Clara that pride was a luxury few could actually afford. Over the next few days, Clara helped Anna settle in, finding her work at the hotel and a small room at the boarding house. The town watched with interest as Clara Hayes, who'd arrived with nothing, now supported a family member in need. It shifted something in the public perception. She wasn't just successful, she was generous with that success. The bakery expansion continued at a rapid pace. The new ovens arrived from Denver, massive things that required reinforcement of the floor. Clara hired 2 young men from the Grange to help with the heavy work, and a widow named Mrs. Brennan to manage the additional baking. The smell of fresh bread now filled the street from dawn to dusk. It was during this chaos that Eli made his own preparations. Clara discovered this when she arrived at his ranch one evening for dinner and found him building something in the barn. "What's this?" she asked, examining the careful construction. "A surprise. Or it was supposed to be." He stepped back, revealing a beautiful wooden desk carved with delicate flowers along the edges. "Every business owner needs a proper desk. This one's yours." Clara ran her hands over the smooth surface, touched beyond words. "You made this?" "Margaret taught me woodworking. Said a man should know how to build something beautiful, not just functional." He watched her explore the hidden drawers and clever compartments. "There's something else." He led her to the house, to a room she'd never seen before. It had been closed on her previous visits, and she'd assumed it was storage. Instead, she found a small office, complete with bookshelves, a window overlooking the ranch, and space for the desk. "I thought," Eli said carefully, "that when you're my wife, you might want a place here for your business work. Separate from the household, just for you." Clara turned to him, overwhelmed. "You built me an office?" "You'll need space to manage the Denver contracts, plan expansions, whatever comes next. This could be yours if you want it. Most men would expect their wives to give up such things." "I'm not most men. And you're definitely not most women." He pulled out a rolled paper. "I also had our lawyer friend draw this up." Clara unrolled it to find a legal document, carefully worded to ensure that her business assets would remain separate from marital property, that she would maintain full control of her enterprise regardless of marriage. "Is this even legal?" she asked, reading through the careful language. "Mr. Morrison says it's unconventional but binding. He's seen similar arrangements in larger cities. Times are changing, slowly. And you're willing to sign this? To have a wife who keeps her own money, her own business?" "Clara, I'm not marrying you for your money or your business. I'm marrying you for your strength, your determination, the way you make me want to be better than I am." He took her hands. "Keep your independence." "I just want your heart." She kissed him then, pouring all her gratitude and love into the gesture. When they parted, she said, "You have it. You've had it for months." They were married 3 weeks later in a small ceremony that scandalized half the town and delighted the other half. Clara wore a simple blue dress she'd bought with her own money, carried wildflowers Eli had picked himself, and kept her business name alongside taking his. The church registry read Clara Hayes Ward, a hyphenation that had Mrs. Whitmore practically apoplectic. Mrs. Patterson stood as Clara's witness, beaming with pride. "Never thought I'd see the day," she whispered. "A woman keeping her name and her business in marriage. You're making history, girl." Anna attended, still fragile but growing stronger, watching her sister marry for love rather than survival, with something like awe. Mr. Hollowell gave Clara away, grumbling about losing his best baker to domestic life, until Clara reminded him she'd be at work the next morning as usual. The wedding dinner was held at the bakery, transformed for the evening into something magical with lanterns and flowers. The entire Grange crew attended, along with the contractors, the new employees, and a surprising number of townspeople who'd come to respect Clara's journey. Mrs. Cross sent a telegram from Denver. "Building your own light indeed. First order doubles next month." As the evening wound down, Eli found Clara on the bakery's back step, taking a moment of quiet. Her wedding dress was dusted with flour from when she'd insisted on checking tomorrow's bread before the ceremony. "Regrets?" he asked, sitting beside her. "None." "You?" "Only that it took so long to find you." She leaned against him, watching stars appear over the mountains. "I wasn't ready before. I had to become who I am first." "And who are you?" Clara considered. "Clara Hayes Ward. Baker, business owner, wife, survivor, and just getting started." The Denver contracts proved more lucrative than even Clara's optimistic projections. Within 2 months, they were shipping daily to 3 hotels and 5 restaurants. The bakery had to hire 4 more workers, and Clara found herself managing a small empire. She split her time between the bakery and the ranch, riding out each evening to the home she now shared with Eli. He'd adjusted to married life with the same quiet adaptability he brought to everything, never complaining when she worked late, never questioning when she needed to travel to Denver for business. But not everyone accepted their arrangement. Claire discovered this when she overheard 2 ranch hands talking near the barn. "It ain't natural," one said. "A wife should be home, tending house, not running around playing businessman." "Ward's gone soft," the other agreed, "letting a woman wear the pants." "My wife tried that. She'd get reminded real quick who's in charge." Claire stepped around the corner. "Then it's fortunate I'm not your wife, isn't it?" Both men went red. The first stammered, "Mrs. Ward, we didn't—" "It's Mrs. Hayes Ward." "And you're both fired. Collect your wages from my husband and be gone by sunset." "You can't fire us." "Ward hired us, and I'm his business partner as well as his wife. I handle the books, including payroll. You're done here." The men stormed off to find Eli, presumably to complain. Clara followed at a distance, curious how he'd handle it. She found them at the corral, the hands gesticulating angrily while Eli listened calmly. "She can't just fire us," one insisted. "She's just your wife." "She's right. You're fired," Eli said simply. "If you can't respect her, you can't work here. Clear out." After they left, muttering and cursing, Eli found Clara in the barn. "You could have let me handle that." "I could have, but they insulted me, not you. They insulted us both. The suggestion that I'm weak for supporting your success insults everything I believe." He pulled her close. "Besides, they were lazy workers." "You did me a favor." That night, as they lay in bed, Clara said, "It's going to keep happening. People challenging us, testing our arrangement. Let them. We'll keep proving them wrong." But the challenges came from unexpected sources. A month after the wedding, Clara received a letter from Thomas Mercer. She almost threw it away unread, but curiosity won. "Clara," it began, "I write from Denver, where my aunt has put me to work in her warehouses. The labor is hard, the pay modest, and I find myself thinking often of our brief encounter. I owe you an apology, not for rejecting you, as we were clearly unsuited, but for my cruelty. You were honest about who you were. I was the one living in delusion about what I wanted. I hear you've married Ward and built a thriving business. It seems you've won our strange competition. I wish you well. Thomas." Clara showed the letter to Eli, who read it with raised eyebrows. "He's learned something, at least." "People can change," Clara said. "I'm proof of that." "You didn't change. You revealed. There's a difference." Winter came early that year, harsh and unforgiving. The bakery struggled to keep up with demand as roads became difficult to navigate. Clara found herself working 18-hour days, managing logistics that grew more complex with each storm. It was during the worst blizzard that crisis struck. Clara was at the bakery when a rider arrived, face grim with news. "There's been an accident at the ranch. Mr. Ward, his horse threw him. He's hurt bad." Clara's world tilted. She grabbed her coat and followed the rider into the storm, her mind refusing to process the possibility of losing Eli. The ride seemed endless, wind and snow blinding her, until finally the ranch house appeared. She found Eli in their bedroom, the doctor already present. His leg was splinted, his face pale with pain, but he was conscious. Relief nearly knocked her to her knees. "How bad?" she asked the doctor. "Broken leg, possibly some ribs. He'll recover, but he'll be bedridden for weeks, possibly months." Clara took Eli's hand. "You scared me." "Sorry, horse spooked at something, threw me into the fence." He grimaced. "The ranch, I'll handle it." "You don't know why?" "Then I'll learn." She squeezed his hand. "Partnership, remember? Your turn to let me carry things." The next months tested Clara in ways the bakery never had. She rose before dawn to manage ranch operations, feeding cattle, checking fences, directing the two remaining hands, then rode to town for bakery business, then back to care for Eli. Her body ached constantly. Her hands developed new calluses atop old ones, but she persevered. Anna helped where she could, taking over some bakery duties, proving herself capable despite her previous softness. "You're going to kill yourself," she told Clara one evening, finding her sister asleep at the desk in Eli's office. "I'm fine." "You're not. But you're also magnificent." Anna's voice held wonder. "I was so wrong about you, Clara, about what strength looks like." The town watched Clara manage both businesses, some with admiration, others waiting for her to fail. Mrs. Whitmore was particularly vocal in her predictions of disaster. "She's overreached," she told anyone who would listen. "A woman can't handle all that. She'll lose everything." But Clara didn't lose. She adapted, delegated, learned to trust others with tasks she'd previously handled herself. Mrs. Brennan took over day-to-day bakery operations. Anna managed the books. The ranch hands, seeing Clara's dedication, worked harder than they ever had for Eli alone. Spring arrived with Eli finally able to walk with a cane. He found Clara one morning standing in the doorway of the barn, watching the sunrise. "You did it," he said, joining her. "You kept everything running." "We did it. Even bedridden, you guided me." "No, Clara. This was you." He turned her to face him. You've proven something these past months, that you're capable of anything you set your mind to. I had good motivation. I couldn't lose what we've built. What we've built is more than businesses, Eli said. We've built a new kind of partnership. One where both people stand equal, support each other, succeed together. That afternoon, a carriage arrived at the ranch. Mrs. Cross stepped out, elegant despite the dust of travel, her sharp eyes taking in everything. I had to see for myself, she announced. The woman who ran a bakery empire and a ranch simultaneously while nursing an injured husband. You've become quite famous in Denver business circles, Mrs. Hayes Ward. Famous? Clara was startled. Oh, yes, the lady baker who refused to give up her name or her business, who survived public rejection to build an empire. You're rather inspiring to a certain type of woman. Mrs. Cross smiled. Which is why I'm here with a proposition. She unrolled papers on Clara's desk, plans for a bakery in Denver bearing Clara's name, funded by Cross Industries but managed entirely by Clara. This is too much, Clara protested. It's business. Your products sell faster than we can stock them. Having you in Denver would be profitable for everyone. Mrs. Cross leaned forward. But more than that, I want to prove something, that a woman can build a business empire every bit as successful as any man's. You're my proof, Clara. Clara looked at the plans, her mind already racing with possibilities. I'd need to find someone to run the Cedar Ridge location. Anna, Eli said immediately. She's proven herself. Clara turned to him. You'd be willing to move to Denver? Leave your ranch? I'd be willing to split time. Maybe we get a small place there, keep the ranch for weekends. Or maybe we find good managers for both and travel wherever the business takes us. He smiled. Adventure sounds nice. You'd do that? Change your whole life for my ambition? You changed your whole life for my injury. Partnership, remember? Clara looked between Eli and Mrs. Cross, then at the plans spread before her. The girl who'd stepped off that train, rejected and alone, could never have imagined this moment, choosing not whether to survive but how to thrive. I'll need 3 months to establish Anna here and train managers, she told Mrs. Cross. And I want Eli listed as co-investor, equal partner. Mrs. Cross raised an eyebrow. Most women would want sole credit. I'm not most women, and success is sweeter when shared with someone who believes in you. The news of Clara's Denver expansion spread through Cedar Ridge like wildfire. Some celebrated her success, the local girl made good. Others, like Mrs. Whitmore, predicted doom. She'll lose herself in the city, she proclaimed, forget where she came from, abandon the people who supported her. But Clara had no intention of forgetting. At the announcement dinner she held at the bakery, she made that clear. Cedar Ridge gave me my start when I had nothing, she told the gathered crowd. This bakery will remain open, run by my sister and the excellent staff we've trained. The Grange will continue to receive priority contracts, and Eli and I will maintain our ranch, our home base. Success doesn't mean forgetting your roots, it means using them to grow even stronger. Old Mrs. Palmer, who'd been Clara's first defender in the shop that day, with Thomas and Victoria, raised her glass. To Clara Hayes Ward, the woman who showed us all what's possible. The toast echoed through the room, even Mrs. Whitmore reluctantly raising her glass. Clara stood among these people who'd witnessed her journey, Eli's hand warm in hers, Anna beaming with pride, and felt the profound satisfaction of earned success. Later that evening, as the celebration continued, Clara stepped outside for air. She found herself face to face with the train station visible in the distance, lit by the moon, the same platform where she'd stood months ago, rejected and alone. Full circle, Eli said, joining her. Not a circle. A spiral. I'm back at the same place, but higher up, seeing further. What do you see? Clara considered. Possibility. For women like me, like Anna, like the daughters of this town who might want more than what's expected. I see a future where a woman keeping her name and her business isn't scandalous, but normal. That's a big vision. I've learned to dream big. She turned to him. Do you regret it? Marrying a woman who'll always want more? I married a woman who knows that more isn't about greed. It's about growth. You don't want more things, Clara. You want more life, more impact, more proof that someone who starts with nothing can build everything. And you don't feel diminished by my success? Eli laughed, pulling her close. Your success is our success. Every victory you achieve, I celebrate. Every challenge you face, I face with you. That's what real partnership means. A figure approached through the darkness. Anna, her face excited. Clara, urgent message from Denver. 3 more restaurants want contracts, and there's interest from a hotel chain in San Francisco. Clara's pulse quickened with possibility, but she looked to Eli first. He grinned. Sounds like we're going to need a bigger office. We're really doing this, Clara said, wonder in her voice. Building something that matters. You've always built things that matter, Eli said. Now you're just doing it on a larger scale. Anna looked between them, something like envy flickering across her face. Not for the success or the money, but for the partnership, the absolute mutual support. You two are going to change the world. No, Clara said, thinking of all the women who would come after, who would see what was possible when someone refused to accept limitations. We're just going to show it what was always possible. The bakery door opened, spilling light and laughter into the street to Mrs. Brennan called out, "Clara, they're asking for a speech." Clara looked once more at the train station, that symbol of her lowest moment, then at the bakery bearing her name, symbol of her rise. Between them stood the woman she'd become, scarred but strong, wealthy but working, married but independent. "Let's go," she told Eli and Anna. "Time to tell them about the future we're building." As they walked back to the celebration, Clara thought about the letter she'd write to Thomas Mercer. Not to gloat, but to thank him. His rejection had been the catalyst for everything, every struggle that strengthened her, every small victory that led to larger ones, every moment that proved she was more than what others saw. Inside the bakery, surrounded by the warmth of ovens and friendship, Clara Hayes Ward stood to speak. She looked at the faces watching her, some that had sneered, some that had helped, all now witnessing what happened when a woman refused to accept the word ugly as her definition. 6 months ago, she began, her voice clear and strong, I arrived in Cedar Ridge with nothing but determination and working hands. Many of you witnessed my humiliation, my struggle. Some helped, some hindered, but all of you watched. What you've witnessed isn't just my story. It's proof that anyone, regardless of their start, can build something meaningful. She raised her own glass, filled with cider from the Grange. To Cedar Ridge, which taught me that home isn't where you're welcomed, but where you make yourself indispensable. To hard work that no one can take away. And to partnerships, in business and in life, that make us more than we could be alone. The cheer that rose shook the rafters, and Clara knew that somewhere in this crowd were young women watching, learning, planning their own rises. She'd shown them it was possible. Now they would show others. The Denver establishment took shape faster than Clara had imagined. Within 6 weeks of signing the papers with Mrs. Cross, she stood in a building 3 times the size of the Cedar Ridge Bakery, watching workers install the latest ovens from Chicago. The location was prime, near the business district where wealthy patrons would pay premium prices for quality goods. You're nervous, Eli observed, finding her there at dawn before the workers arrived. Terrified, Clara admitted. Cedar Ridge was one thing. This is Denver society, established businesses, real competition. You've never backed down from a challenge yet. I've never had so much to lose. She gestured at the gleaming equipment, the marble counters, the etched glass windows that would bear her name. If this fails, it won't fail. You won't let it. He pulled her against him. Besides, you're not doing this alone. That reminder sustained her through the frantic weeks of preparation. Anna had taken to managing the Cedar Ridge location with surprising skill, allowing Clara to focus entirely on Denver. She hired carefully, a mix of experienced bakers from the city and hungry young workers who reminded her of herself. Among them was a girl named Sarah, barely 17, whose hands bore the telltale calluses of hard labor. "Why do you want to work here?" Clara asked during the interview. "Because you're proof it's possible," Sarah said simply. A woman owning something real, not just playing at business until marriage. "I want to learn from you." Clara hired her immediately. The grand opening was set for a Thursday morning in May. Mrs. Cross had insisted on making it an event, inviting Denver's elite to sample Clara's creations. The night before, Clara couldn't sleep, pacing their rented rooms while Eli watched from the bed. What if they don't come? What if the food isn't good enough? What if... Clara. His voice stopped her spiral. Remember the morning after Thomas rejected you? You stood in that freezing station with nothing but pride. Now look where you are. She climbed into bed beside him. I'm still the same woman with working hands. No, you're not. You're that woman who refused to let working hands define her limits. He kissed her forehead. Tomorrow, Denver meets Clara Hayes Ward. They're not ready. He was right. The opening exceeded every expectation. A line formed before dawn, and by noon they'd sold out completely. Mrs. Cross held court in the corner, directing society matrons to try Clara's revolutionary approach to traditional pastries. The Denver Post sent a reporter who seemed fascinated by Clara's story. A mail-order bride rejected for her working-class status, who now owned 2 successful bakeries. How does it feel, the reporter asked, to have proven your former suitor so wrong? Clara considered her words carefully. Mr. Mercer did me a favor. His rejection forced me to discover what I was truly capable of. I wouldn't be here if he'd accepted me. You're grateful for the humiliation? I'm grateful for the education. Every hardship teaches us something. Mine taught me that my worth wasn't determined by someone else's opinion. The article ran the next day with the headline, From Rejection to Triumph, the Clara Hayes Ward Story. Orders flooded in, not just for baked goods, but for Clara to speak at women's societies, to mentor young female entrepreneurs, to prove that her success wasn't a fluke. It was at one such speaking engagement that Clara encountered unexpected resistance. The Denver Women's Auxiliary had invited her to address their monthly meeting, held in the grand ballroom of the Palace Hotel. Clara arrived in her best dress, still simpler than most of the attendees' daily wear, and found herself facing 50 women who looked at her with expressions ranging from curiosity to skepticism. The president, Mrs. Cornelius Vandermeer, introduced her with barely concealed condescension. Ladies, our speaker today is Mrs. Hayes Ward, who has a rather unusual story of business success. Clara stood, feeling the weight of their judgment. These weren't the working women who usually sought her advice. These were society wives, women who'd never known want, who viewed commerce as somehow beneath them, even as they benefited from their husbands' business dealings. Thank you for having me, Clara began. I understand my story might seem foreign to many of you. Foreign is one word for it, interrupted a woman in silk and pearls. Tell us, Mrs. Hayes Ward, do you really think it's appropriate for women to engage in commerce? Doesn't it diminish our feminine nature? Clara had prepared for this question. I think femininity takes many forms. Some women express it through managing beautiful homes, raising children, supporting their husbands' ambitions. Others express it through creation, whether that's art, literature, or in my case, building a business that employs dozens of women who might otherwise have no respectable income. But surely, another woman interjected, a woman's place is in the home. Your husband must suffer from your divided attention. Before Clara could respond, a familiar voice spoke from the back of the room. On the contrary, I've never been better cared for. Eli stood in the doorway, hat in hand, his presence commanding despite his simple clothes. I apologize for interrupting, ladies, but I couldn't let that statement stand. My wife's success hasn't diminished our marriage. It's enhanced it. I married a partner, not a servant. Mrs. Vandermeer looked scandalized. Mr. Ward, surely you must feel emasculated by your wife's public pursuits. The only thing that would emasculate me, Eli said calmly, would be being so insecure that I needed to limit my wife's potential to feel like a man. Clara's success doesn't threaten me. It inspires me. He walked to Clara's side, taking her hand publicly. Every morning, I wake up beside a woman who built something from nothing, who faced public humiliation and transformed it into triumph. That doesn't make me less of a man. It makes me proud to be her husband. The room was silent. Then from a corner came slow applause. A young woman, perhaps 20, stood up. I want to know more, she said, about how you started, how you managed the financial aspects, how you dealt with resistance. Others joined her, younger women mostly, but some older ones too. Soon Clara was surrounded by genuinely interested faces, questions flowing about practical matters rather than philosophical objections. Mrs. Vandermeer and her silk-clad contingent withdrew to the edges, their disapproval evident but overshadowed. Later, as Clara and Eli walked back to their lodgings, she said, "You didn't have to defend me." "I wasn't defending you. I was educating them. There's a difference." He squeezed her hand. "Besides, someone needed to say it, that strong women don't weaken men. They reveal which men are already weak." That night brought unexpected news. A telegram arrived from Cedar Ridge. Anna was being courted by the new bank manager, a widower named James Mitchell, who'd arrived in town 3 weeks prior. "He's kind," Anna's letter explained. "Nothing like my first husband. He admires what you've built, Clara, and he doesn't want me to stop working at the bakery. He says he's seen too many talented women waste away in parlors. Can you believe it? A man who actually wants me to keep working?" Clara shared the letter with Eli, who smiled. "Seems your example is contagious. Or maybe there are more good men than we knew, they just needed permission to admit it." The Denver bakery's success continued to grow, requiring Clara to hire more staff and expand delivery routes. She implemented something revolutionary, profit sharing with her employees. The more the business earned, the more they earned. It motivated excellence in a way simple wages never could. "You're spoiling them," warned Mr. Hollowell during one of his visits. "They'll expect the same everywhere." "Good," Clara replied. "Maybe if enough workers expect fair treatment, employers will have to provide it." It was during this period of growth that Clara received an unexpected visitor. She was in the bakery's office, reviewing accounts, when Sarah knocked on the door. "There's a lady here to see you, Mrs. Hayes Ward. Says her name is Margaret Ward." Clara's blood chilled. "That's impossible." "That's what she said to say if you doubted it." Clara descended to find a woman in the shop, elderly, frail, but with eyes that held unmistakable sharpness. She looked nothing like what Clara had imagined Eli's late wife would look like, because she wasn't Eli's wife at all. "You're his mother," Clara breathed. "Finally, someone with sense." The woman settled into a chair with obvious relief. "I've come a long way to meet the woman who finally got my son to live again." "Eli never mentioned that I was alive." "No, he wouldn't. We had a falling out when he married Margaret. I didn't approve, thought she was too delicate for ranch life. I was wrong, but by the time I realized it, she was gone and Eli wouldn't speak to me." She studied Clara with those sharp eyes. "You're nothing like her." "I know." "That's not an insult, girl. Margaret was wonderful, but she was safe, expected. You're neither of those things." She pulled out a worn letter. "Eli wrote to me. First contact in 5 years. All about you, how you challenged him, changed him, made him want more than mere survival." Clara took the letter with trembling hands, recognizing Eli's careful script. It was dated just after their wedding, pages of his thoughts about her, about them, about the future he suddenly believed in again. "Why are you showing me this?" "Because you need to know what you mean to him, and because I need to ask your forgiveness." "Mine?" "I'm dying," the old woman said bluntly. "Cancer, the doctor says, months at most. I want to reconcile with my son, but I need your help. He'll listen to you." Clara closed the shop early and took Mrs. Ward, the elder Mrs. Ward, home to their rented rooms. Eli's shock at seeing his mother was profound, years of hurt and anger warring with love on his face. "Hello, son," his mother said simply. "You're here." "Clara brought me." Eli looked between them, and Clara saw him make a choice. He stepped forward and embraced his mother, carefully, as if she might break. Which, given her frailty, she might. "I'm sorry," both said simultaneously, then laughed through tears. The elder Mrs. Ward stayed with them for a week, long enough to share stories Clara had never heard, about Eli as a boy, about his father who died young, about the dreams he'd had before loss hardened him. "He wanted to write," his mother told Clara one evening while Eli was out. "Had notebooks full of stories. Gave it up when his father died, said stories were for people with time to waste. He never mentioned he wouldn't. But maybe now, with you showing him that dreams aren't foolish, he might pick up a pen again." Before she left, returning to her sister's house in Kansas where she'd live her remaining months, Mrs. Ward pressed a small box into Clara's hands. "This was my mother's, and her mother's before that. It should have gone to Margaret, but I was too proud. Don't make my mistakes, Clara. Family is what we choose to make it. Inside was a simple gold ring, worn thin by generations of working hands. Clara slipped it onto her right hand where it fit perfectly. That night she found Eli at his desk, the one in their Denver rooms, writing in a notebook. A story, she asked. Our story. Or a version of it. About people who build lives instead of just living them. He looked up at her. You brought my mother back to me. She brought herself. I just opened the door. You're always opening doors, Clara. For yourself, for others, for possibilities no one else sees. The Denver bakery had been open 6 months when crisis struck. Clara arrived one morning to find the windows smashed, flour scattered across the floor, and "Go home" painted on the walls. Her employees stood outside, afraid to enter. Who did this? Clara demanded. Probably Morrison's crew, Sarah said, referring to a competing bakery whose business had suffered since Clara's arrival. He's been saying awful things about you, about women in business. Clara surveyed the damage, fury building in her chest. Not at the destruction, that could be repaired, but at the attempt to frighten her, to make her small again. Clean it up, she told her workers. We open at regular time. But Mrs. Hayes Ward, the windows, leave them. Let everyone see what fear looks like when it faces progress. They opened with boarded windows, the message still partially visible despite scrubbing. Customers came in droves, some out of curiosity, others in solidarity. By noon, they'd sold more than any previous day. Morrison himself appeared that afternoon, swagger in his step and malice in his smile. Heard you had some trouble. Nothing I can't handle. A woman alone in business is vulnerable. Maybe you need protection. From whom? You? His smile widened. I could make sure nothing else happens. For a price. Say 60% of your profits? Clara laughed, surprising him. Mr. Morrison, I've been threatened by better men than you. I've been rejected, humiliated, frozen, and nearly broken. Do you really think some flour and paint frighten me? You should be frightened. The only thing that frightens me is the thought of becoming like you, so scared of competition that you resort to vandalism and extortion. She stepped closer. I've already contacted the police and my lawyer. I've also spoken to your wife. Morrison paled. My wife? Lovely woman. Very interested to learn where you've been spending your evenings. That singer at the Golden Eagle, isn't it? You wouldn't... Try me again and find out. Clara's voice was steel. Now get out of my establishment. Morrison fled, and within a week his bakery closed. Not from Clara's threats, but from his wife's divorce proceedings. The Denver Post ran another story about Clara, this time focused on her standing up to intimidation. Orders increased again. You're becoming a symbol, Mrs. Cross told her during a business lunch. Whether you intended it or not, you represent something to women throughout Colorado. I just wanted to bake bread and own something. The personal becomes political when you're the first. Every success you have makes it easier for the next woman. As if to prove this point, Clara began receiving letters. Dozens, then hundreds. Women writing from all over the country, sharing their stories of rejection and triumph, asking for advice, thanking her for proving it was possible. One letter stood out, arriving on a particularly difficult day when Clara was managing both locations, dealing with supplier issues, and fighting exhaustion. The handwriting was shaky, elderly. Dear Mrs. Hayes Ward, I am 73 years old. When I was young, I wanted to open a dress shop. My father said no, my husband said no, society said no. I listened. I spent my life in parlors, pouring tea, being decorative. I read about you in the newspaper, about how you were rejected and built an empire anyway. It's too late for me. But I wanted you to know that your courage gives me comfort. At least I lived to see the world change. Continue being brave for those of us who couldn't be. Clara wept over that letter, Eli holding her as she sobbed for all the wasted potential, all the dreams deferred, all the women who'd been told no and believed it. This is why you can't stop, he said softly. Not for the money or the success, but for them, the ones watching, hoping, planning. The first year ended with both bakeries profitable beyond projections. Clara stood in the Denver office on New Year's Eve, looking at the books that showed black ink, substantial black ink. She'd paid back Eli's investment with interest, though he'd tried to refuse it. Partners don't charge each other interest, he'd protested. Business partners do. This has to be legitimate, Eli. No one can say I succeeded because a man supported me. She'd also sent money to Thomas Mercer. Eli had been shocked. Why would you do that? Because his rejection gave me everything. Consider it a finder's fee for my life. Thomas had written back, his letter brief. I don't deserve this grace, but I accept it. Use it to know that I understand now what I lost. Not a wife, but the chance to witness your becoming. Now, as 1896 approached, Clara allowed herself a moment of pure satisfaction. The girl at the train station was gone, replaced by a woman who employed 37 people, owned 2 thriving businesses, and had a marriage that redefined what partnership could mean. Eli found her there, champagne in hand. Celebrating alone? Remembering. Good memories? Terrible memories. The best kind, the ones that remind you how far you've come. She accepted the champagne. What shall we toast? To the future? No, Clara said, thinking of all the letters, all the women watching, all the changes yet to come. To refusing to accept no. To building our own definitions. To proving that ugly is just another word for strength they haven't learned to recognize yet. They toasted as midnight struck, and somewhere in Denver, in Cedar Ridge, across Colorado and beyond, women were reading about Clara Hayes Ward and thinking, if she can do it. The second year brought unexpected challenges. The economic downturn hit Denver hard, and luxury goods like specialty pastries were the first cuts in household budgets. Clara watched her sales drop by half in a single month. We need to adapt, she told her assembled staff. We're going to add basic breads, affordable options, and we're going to start a daily special, day-old goods at half price. That'll hurt our reputation, Sarah worried. We're supposed to be elite. We're supposed to survive. Pride doesn't pay wages or feed families. The strategy worked. While other luxury establishments closed, Clara's bakeries pivoted to serve all classes. She saw former society customers standing in line next to working men, all seeking affordable quality. It broke down barriers in unexpected ways. One morning, Clara found Mrs. Vandermeer in line for day-old bread. The woman who'd questioned her femininity now stood with a basket, her fine clothes showing wear. My husband's investments failed, she said quietly. We've lost almost everything. Clara packed extra bread into her basket, charging her for only half. Come see me tomorrow. I need someone to manage appointments and correspondence. Can you write a fine hand? Mrs. Vandermeer's eyes filled with tears. You'd hire me? After how I treated you? We all deserve second chances. Besides, you know every society matron in Denver. When the economy recovers, that knowledge will be valuable. Mrs. Vandermeer became one of Clara's most dedicated employees. Her transformation from critic to advocate, powerful testimony to circumstances' ability to teach empathy. During this difficult period, Eli's ranch provided stability. The cattle business remained steady, and he insisted on supporting the bakeries through the lean months. It's not charity, he argued when Clara resisted. It's investment. The economy will recover, and you'll be positioned to dominate when it does. He was right. By year's end, the recovery had begun, and Clara's businesses, now serving all economic classes, were perfectly positioned for growth. She opened a third location, this one in Colorado Springs, managed by Sarah, who'd proven herself capable beyond her years. It was then that Clara discovered she was pregnant. The revelation came on an ordinary Tuesday, confirmed by a doctor who seemed surprised by her reaction. Most women are happy about this news, he said carefully. Most women aren't running 3 businesses, Clara replied, her mind already racing with complications. She told Eli that evening, finding him in his office at the ranch, working on what she now knew was a collection of stories inspired by their life. I'm pregnant. His pen stopped mid-word. Truly? Truly. The joy on his face was immediate and complete, but then he saw her expression. You're worried. Everything will change. I can't work the same hours, can't travel as easily. People will expect me to step back, to become just a mother. Since when have you done what people expect? This is different, Eli. A baby. That's not something I can schedule around business meetings. He set down his pen and pulled her into his lap. Do you want this child? The question cut straight to her fear. I don't know. I never thought about children. I was too busy surviving, then building. What if I'm terrible at it? What if I resent the limitation? What if you're as good at motherhood as you are at everything else you've attempted? What if this child grows up seeing a mother who refuses limitations, who builds empires while raising family? He placed his hand on her still flat stomach. What if we raise a daughter who never questions whether she can do both because she watched you do it? Clara leaned into him, allowing herself to imagine it. We'd need help. Nurses, nannies. I won't give up the businesses. Then we'll hire help. Clara, we have money now. Use it to build the life you want, not the life others expect. She kissed him then, pouring her fear and hope into the gesture. When they parted, she said, If it's a girl, I want to name her Margaret, for the women who came before. If it's a boy. Thomas, Eli said with a slight smile, for the fool whose rejection started everything. Clara laughed despite herself. Absolutely not. The pregnancy became public knowledge quickly. Nothing stayed secret long in their circles. Reactions were mixed. Some predicted Clara would finally settle down. Others wondered how she'd manage. But support came from unexpected sources. Anna arrived from Cedar Ridge, insisting on helping. You supported me when I had nothing. Let me support you now. Mrs. Patterson sent a letter. Raise that child in the bakery if you have to. Let them see work isn't something to hide from children, but to include them in. Even Thomas Mercer, now married to a school teacher in Denver, sent congratulations. May your child inherit your strength and determination and find their own path to rejection and triumph. Clara worked until the day she gave birth, literally conducting a business meeting between contractions. The baby, a girl, arrived screaming into the world with the same determination her mother had shown at that train station. Margaret Anna Ward, Clara announced, holding her daughter while simultaneously reviewing contracts for a new supplier. Maggie for short. The sight of Clara, hours after giving birth, negotiating prices while nursing, became legend among her employees. Here was proof that motherhood and ambition weren't mutually exclusive. Clara refused the traditional confinement period, returning to work within 2 weeks with Maggie in a sling across her chest. She conducted meetings while nursing, reviewed accounts while rocking a cradle with her foot, and taught her daughter the rhythm of work from the very beginning. You're making a spectacle, Mrs. Whitmore, now a regular customer again, observed one day, watching Clara knead dough one-handed while holding Maggie. Good. Let them see it can be done. But should it be done? Clara looked at her daughter, who was watching the bakery activity with alert, curious eyes. My mother worked herself to death in other people's houses while I played at her feet. I learned that work was something that took her away. I want Maggie to learn that work is something that fulfills me, that builds our life. There's a difference. As Maggie grew from infant to toddler, she became a fixture in the bakeries, toddling between ovens, napping in a corner specially set up for her, learning to count with bread rolls. Customers grew used to seeing Clara conducting business with a child on her hip, proving daily that women didn't have to choose. The businesses continued to thrive. Clara opened 2 more locations, implemented innovative employee benefits, including childcare assistance, and began offering apprenticeships specifically for young women. Her success inspired imitators, and soon Denver had several women-owned bakeries. You've created your own competition, Eli observed one evening, watching Clara review applications for her apprenticeship program. Good. Competition makes us all better. Besides, there's room for all of us. The pie doesn't have to be finite. It was during Maggie's second year that Clara received the letter that would change everything. It came from Washington, D.C., from a senator's wife who'd heard of Clara's story. Mrs. Hayes Ward, I'm writing to invite you to speak before a congressional committee on women's economic participation. Your story, from mail-order bride to business owner, represents exactly the kind of American success story that needs to be heard. Would you consider coming to Washington to testify about the barriers and opportunities for women in business? Clara read the letter 3 times, her heart pounding. This was beyond anything she'd imagined, a chance to influence policy, to make change at a national level. You have to go, Eli said immediately. It's 3 weeks away from the businesses, from you and Maggie. Then we'll come with you. Maggie should see the capital, see her mother changing the world. They made the journey by train, the same mode of transport that had brought Clara to her humiliation, now carrying her to her triumph. As the Colorado mountains gave way to plains, then to the buildings of Washington, Clara thought about circles and spirals, about journeys that led not back to where you started, but to where you were always meant to be. The congressional hearing was held in a grand room that smelled of tobacco and old wood. Clara sat before a panel of stern-faced men, Maggie on her lap because she'd refused to leave her with the hotel nurse. "State your name for the record," the committee chair instructed. "Clara Hayes Ward, owner of Hayes Ward Bakeries, employer of 63 people, mother of 1. "Mrs. Ward, you're here to discuss—" "Hayes Ward," Clara corrected. "I kept my business name when I married. It's important to the story." And so she told it, all of it. The rejection at the train station, the frozen nights in the storeroom, the slow build of success, the resistance and support she'd encountered. She spoke of the letters from women across the country, of the employees she'd lifted from poverty, of the daughter she was raising to never question her own capabilities. "Gentlemen," she concluded, "I'm not asking for special treatment for women. I'm asking for the removal of special restrictions. Let us compete fairly. Let us own property without our husband's permission. Let us control our own earnings. Let us prove what we're capable of when artificial barriers are removed." One senator, his skepticism evident, asked, "But don't you think women are naturally suited to domestic life? Isn't business too harsh for the gentler sex?" Clara looked at him steadily, then held up her hands, still scarred, still strong. "Senator, I've been called ugly for these hands. They've been mocked, rejected, seen as proof I wasn't worthy of marriage. But these hands built a business empire. They've kneaded bread and signed contracts, comforted my child and fought off extortion. There's nothing gentle about success, and women are tougher than you know. We just haven't been allowed to show it." The room was silent. Then, from the gallery where wives and female reporters sat, applause began. It spread until even some committee members were clapping. Clara's testimony made national newspapers. From rejection to revolution, the baker who went to Washington ran in papers from New York to San Francisco. Letters poured in from women everywhere, sharing their stories, their dreams, their plans to follow Clara's example. But the greatest moment came on the train ride home. As they pulled into Cedar Ridge for a stop, Clara saw a crowd gathered at the station, the same platform where she'd been rejected 3 years before. At first she thought something was wrong. Then she saw the banner, "Welcome home, Clara Hayes Ward, our pride." The crowd cheered as she stepped off the train, Maggie in her arms, Eli beside her. Mrs. Whitmore was there, Mrs. Patterson, Anna with her new husband, Mr. Hollowell, even some of the women who'd initially shunned her. They'd all come to celebrate her, to claim her as their own success story. "Speech!" someone called, and others took up the cry. Clara stood on the same platform where Thomas Mercer had called her a mistake, where she'd been left with nothing but determination. Now she stood there as a business owner, a mother, a woman who'd testified before Congress. 3 years ago, she began, her voice carrying across the crowd, I stood on this platform with nothing but working hands and wounded pride. A man looked at me and saw only what I lacked. Today I stand here with everything I've built, everyone I employ, and everyone I've inspired. The difference isn't in me. I'm the same woman with the same scarred hands. The difference is in what I refuse to accept. She lifted Maggie higher, letting the child see the crowd. This little girl will grow up in a world where her mother owns businesses, where women can testify before Congress, where marriage is partnership, not ownership. She'll never know the word ugly as a limitation because we're changing what that word means. We're making it mean strong, capable, unstoppable. The crowd erupted in cheers, and Clara felt the profound satisfaction of a journey completed. Not ended. There was still so much to build, to change, to prove, but completed in the sense that she'd traveled from rejection to recognition, from nothing to everything, from being called ugly to being called revolutionary. That night, in their ranch home, Eli found her in the office he'd built for her, working on plans for yet another bakery location. "Don't you ever stop?" he asked, but his tone was affectionate. "Do you want me to?" "Never. I love watching you conquer the world. He sat beside her, pulling her close. That girl at the train station would be amazed. No, Clara said, thinking of that desperate, determined woman. She wouldn't be amazed. She'd say it took long enough. She knew what she was capable of. She just needed the chance to prove it. And now? Now she has 6 bakeries, 63 employees, a daughter who'll never doubt herself, and a husband who sees her as an equal. Clara smiled. And she's just getting started. Outside, the Colorado night stretched vast and full of stars, each one a possibility, a dream waiting to be claimed. Clara Hayes Ward, who'd arrived with nothing but determination, now sat in her own office, in her own home, planning her next expansion. The word ugly had long since transformed from insult to irrelevance. What mattered now was what had always mattered: the strength in scarred hands, the power in refused limitations, the beauty in building something from nothing and calling it yours.